we're going to talk about documenting the crime scene. So there's three things that we're going to consider are the minimum documentation that have to be had from every crime scene. You have to have notes, or a crime scene log would be another way of calling them the notes. Photos, and you have to have a crime scene sketch. So these are things that you have to leave the crime scene with if you're the investigator. There might be more things than this, but these would be the minimum three. So we begin with the crime scene notes. And again, one of the things that's tricky is that the crime scene note log begins before you ever arrive at the scene. It begins when you're called to the scene. So if you're the investigator, you'd be the one taking the notes. When you are called to go to the scene, you begin the log with time, who contacted you, where are you going, the briefest information you were told about the case. And then when you arrive on scene, you're going to log who was there, what personnel from the department was there, what eyewitnesses, what victims, what suspects, everybody who's there. And then they should contain a log of all of your observations as you're seeing them, and also any changes in personnel. So anybody leaving the scene, what time did they leave the scene, who they were, anybody entering the scene, what time it is, who they were. So we have a complete history of who was where when. It should have a pretty consistent layout. That's going to be a department thing, but they should be some kind of system of how they're systematically done. It should be in a bound notebook in blue or black ink. This has to do with altering. You want to be able to show that there was no way that the crime scene log was altered. Of course, you want to be able to defend against another lawyer in court saying, yeah, well, this happened, but then they removed that part of the log, and so there's no history of it. They observed this, they talked to this person, and then that discussion was lost, or it was changed. If you write in a spiral notebook, you can rip out the page, and there's no notice. Nobody would be able to tell if there had been a page there or not. If you have a bound notebook and you rip out a page to hide information, it's visible. You'll see those little torn pages in the middle, and it's clear that something got ripped out. So it's clear that it can't be altered with. Same thing with blue and black ink. Blue and black ink, as opposed to a pencil, which could be erased, can't be altered. Additionally, blue and black ink will preserve for many years. So if somebody needs to go back to the crime log from several years later, that ink would still be visible. The next thing is the crime scene photography. And the point of the photography is to kind of capture an unaltered view of the crime scene. So the point is to take them before anything's been altered on the scene, if possible. If there's already people in the scene, that may be changing, but the idea is this is what the scene looked like as close to the crime as possible. So it should be complete and in almost like as if you're doing a walkthrough. So it begins with the outer edges, the periphery of the crime scene, and kind of saying like, this is the front of the house, this is whatever, from outside the crime scene. And then you're going closer and closer in so that everybody can see the full perspective. Here is the dead body, and it was in this room, and the room is in this house, and the house is on this street, right? But you would take them in reverse progression. First, the initial coming on site, and then going into the house, going into the room, finding the body, right? So it's going to get closer and closer. So there's going to be a minimum of 4 scenes. There's going to be an overview photograph. Ideally, it includes the boundary of the crime scene. So it would be like if you arrived at the house, it would be from the street, so you can kind of see it in its context. And then a medium range photograph. Now you're getting more detail, but that detail can be kind of linked to the perspective. It should be then a close-up photograph of any important items. Every important item should have a close-up photograph, a plain one of just like this is what it looked like, and then another one with a scale in it. By scale, we mean ruler, so that any size of the items can be judged by the ruler and we'll call it a scale. Additionally, the technology by which photos are taken is something that rapidly changes. This was really a couple from 5 years ago, and now it's almost everybody uses digital now. Digital The quality of digital used to not be as good as the quality of a SLR type camera that uses optics and film. Nowadays, the digital ones are equally good, and you have much more storage capacity. You can take many more photos and have immediate access to them. So that obviously the technology changes quite quickly. Additionally, the overview, let's kind of go back through these individual shots. The overview should show the entire scene. It should show points of entry and exit. So this is how somebody would get into the scene. This is how somebody could leave from the scene. Again, from these outside borders looking into it. If there is a crime scene with a body, the photograph should show where that body was in relationship to the entire scene. Ideally, all of these pictures should have some kind of visual tag, some item that is in the overview photograph and the medium range and the close range, so that you can kind of see how they all connect. So it's like something that's in everything. So it could, a lot of times we use cones or markers, but it could be some other object. This is kind of showing the original, one. So this would be walking into this apartment. You're seeing the door, the entry to this crime scene in this apartment, and seeing it kind of, here's the staircase, you're seeing it from this perspective. If you go further in, now you see, this would be an example of a coming into the room and kind of seeing there's something on the floor. You can't see what's on the floor, but you kind of say like, okay, I can see where this is in the room. I see this orange marker. As you get closer up, you see right next to the orange marker is a bullet shell, and you can see the casing from it, and you can see this one has the scale in it. There'd probably be one before you had the scale right next to it, and then this one. When you're taking the medium range photographs, again, the idea is to kind of be in between the overview photograph and the super detailed one, to kind of give you a sense of this is what the room looked like, or this is what this area looked like. Taken with the evidence markers in place so that they can link to, oh, I see now where that evidence is. Again, you could see on that picture, you couldn't see the bullet casing because it was too small, but you could see the marker. And then when you saw the marker on the next close-up, you're like, oh, I got where that was, right in front of the door. And it should have at least one from the center of the scene where you're sort of seeing like what's going on around. On the close-up ones, it's important that first you should take it straight looking down at a 90-degree angle. So if it's on the floor, you're like pointing the camera at the floor and looking at it. And then from on the side. So you kind of have a direct and then a one from the side. And then you would add in the ruler and take another set of pictures. The most important close-up photographs are those depicting injuries in any weapons lying near a body. So obviously if there's a victim, whether they are dead or alive, and lying prone, you want to make sure you kind of get them in the detail. Most of the important evidence is going to be right next to the body. If it's a deceased body, after the body is removed, there should be kind of outline or markers showing what was there, and the surface below them might have some evidence. So once they've been removed, the surface underneath should be photographed. Videotaping is now becoming more and more popular. Videotaping may not have quite as much resolution, but you now get to see somebody can narrate through and get quickly the whole sense of the crime scene. So this is a technology that is used. Not every department uses it. It's a little more expensive because they're much larger files to store, and there's a lot more storage of them. But this is another technique that could be used along with photographing. Another one, of course, is these body-worn cameras. These have become very popular, and many departments are making them mandatory. If they're turned on before the crime scene, they really help, before the officer arrives at the crime scene, I should say. They really help with preserving the whole series of incidents that occurred, and making sure everything was done by the book, and getting a sense of the scene unpreserved or preserved from and unaltered from when the officer arrived. Okay, so after this initial photographing and crime scene log happens, then there would be a survey of the crime scene. And this is kind of interactive because obviously the photographs you're taking you have to kind of know, well, what am I taking photographs of? So there's going to be a survey, and ideally trying to figure out where did the perpetrator come in, what was the entry point, were there any ideally you don't want to walk on the path that they took. That's where the most evidence would be, is where the perpetrator was. So if you can be on the periphery, walking around an indirect path would be better. Any obvious items should be documented and photographs taken of them. The conditions of the scene should be left alone. You should never be changing, anything that looks like it might be related. Again, you have no idea what evidence is important and what is not important to the case. So anything that you can find, you would want to document at this point. If there's a vehicle, of course, and there's an awful lot of accidents and incidents that happen at vehicles, so those would want to be preserved. Again, you would start with the outside and then begin a search on the inside. Sometimes with vehicles, there's often a lot of onlookers, and that can be disruptive to the search process. So sometimes the car is taken to the impound and the interior search is done at another location. After you have some of this information, but before you've left the crime scene should be sketched. So they need to be able to show several things: the overall layout of the scene. They should show the relationship of space of everything. So it should be drawn to scale. You can't have a big body in a little room. It should all be written so you can kind of see how the space is around the room. Any important objects should be labeled in some way so that you know what the objects are. They should be also, that's going to allow link to the crime scene log. So you're describing an object and then you're seeing a note saying what that is. They need to show measurements, and the measurements have to show, of course, if it's an outdoor scene, you would need all that evidence. If it's an indoor scene, though, you need to have measurements from two different places. Simply saying something was 5 feet from the wall is not enough. It needs to have dimensions to two different items in the room. And they should be showing any paths of entry or exit. So that's what we're looking to accomplish in showing on the crime scene. Some of the important things that need to be there is the dimensions of the scene. So it has to be measured. The crime scene sketch, the rough sketch, should be done on site. So when you leave the scene, there's already crime scene sketch. It should have a title block with the important case information. If we have a beautiful picture, but you don't know what case it relates to, it's not helpful. So it should show the date and time, who, the investigator, and the basic labeling of the crime scene. If there's a case number assigned, put the case number on it. If it's just by the victim's name, put the victim's name, whatever it is that's going to identify it. You need to have a legend, so you usually don't have enough room to write great descriptions in the sketch itself. So you may just put a number or a letter and then have a legend saying A is the bullet, B is a lamp, whatever. So there might be a legend. Sometimes there's enough space and you can write it directly in the sketch. It all depends. There should be a compass showing the geographical north so that it's clear, okay, how does this put in relationship on geographically to a map? And then the sketch itself should be part of this. Again, anything that's important when you're getting a measurement of its location needs two different measurements. So I can't say I'm at 23 degrees north latitude because that's a whole area around the globe, right? So that doesn't narrow down my position enough. I need a second location. So we use latitude and longitude when we're using that. When you're looking at a crime scene sketch, you're probably going to measure the distance to two different objects in the scene. We'll see an example. Okay, so here we have an example. Again, it may not be super pretty and the rough scene sketch may not be to scale, but the measurements should be all intact. You may be able to see this better in your notes, but as you're looking at this crime scene sketch, you see up here, you have I don't know if you can see the cursor, yeah, right up at the top here, you have a block kind of saying what case number it is, who it is, and the date and the time. On the right-hand side, it happens to have the information about the victim. So we have an awful lot of dimensions in here. Again, notice everything that you're seeing has two different dimensions. If we look at this sofa, we see there's a dimension from this wall and the other wall. And then some of these are kind of drawn, like if you're looking at this, you might be able to tell it's a telephone, maybe you can't tell. They may have letters next to them to identify what they are. So in this case, it's pretty clear that they're just writing what they are here, so I don't need as much of a legend box. But for some of them, here we have a legend box kind of identifying the different objects. Any of these little triangle things are camera view locators. This is saying this is where the pictures were taken from. And it's pointing to the same way that the direction of the arrow point is the way the camera was pointing. So we would see a picture where you could see the sofa and you could see over here, is that a fireplace? And you could see all that. And then when you saw that photo, you'd be like, okay, I see where this picture was taken from. That's pretty helpful when reconstructing a crime scene. I believe that's everything there. And we can see our entries and exits on here, right? So these are all the things that you'd be looking for. Here would be now a finished crime scene. So that's nice, but it's not all that beautiful. So we have professionals in the departments who actually create a professional AutoCAD drawing from these. So once the rough crime scene sketch comes in, a professional artist will render it into a finished sketch. So it's going to be very similar, but now everything's just kind of prettied up. And now it would be done to scale. That's what the CAD drawing system will help with, making it to scale. So we see the same thing we saw there before. We still see the cameras. In this case, they're able to kind of put in labels on everything, so we're not seeing as much. The legend is missing in this, but it would still have that title block and that legend block that was in the last one. This is just showing the body of the sketch itself. All those things would still be necessary, but it's much cleaner and easier to see where everything laid out.